Alice Montgomery stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office at Preston and Blackwood, watching the October sunset paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of amber and gold. Tomorrow would mark her 40th birthday, a milestone she'd planned to celebrate with an intimate gathering of close friends and family at her penthouse apartment. Everything was perfectly arranged, just as she'd orchestrated her entire life, until the email arrived. The message sat in her inbox like a ticking bomb, its sender's name causing her heart to skip a beat: Leonardo Martinez. Leo. A name she hadn't seen in over 5 years, not since that messy breakup right before she met Greg. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but something held her back. The subject line read, "What you need to know about Greg. Ms. Montgomery." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your husband is here." Alice quickly closed the email tab as Greg appeared in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. At 45, he still turned heads with his salt and pepper hair and confident stride. He loosened his blue silk tie, her Christmas gift to him last year, and crossed the room to kiss her cheek. "Ready for dinner, birthday girl?" His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Alice noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his cufflinks, the nervous tick she'd observed more frequently over the past few weeks. "Just need to finish one thing," she said, studying his reflection in the window. "Why don't you wait downstairs? I'll only be a minute." Once Greg left, Alice reopened the email, her legal training kicking in as she analyzed every word. "Alice. I know it's been years, and you probably hate me for reaching out. But there's something you need to know about your perfect husband. Remember Jane from HR? The one who left the firm suddenly before your wedding? Ask Greg about the night of March 15th, 5 years ago. The truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it? Leo." Alice's throat tightened. Jane Peterson had indeed vanished 2 weeks before the wedding, citing a family emergency. Greg had been unusually tense during that period, but Alice had attributed it to pre-wedding stress. Now, fragments of memories began shifting like pieces of a kaleidoscope: Greg's late nights at the office, hushed phone conversations, Jane's tearful goodbye without meeting her eyes. Her phone buzzed, a text from Greg: "Everything okay up there?" Alice gathered her belongings, her mind racing. The rational part of her brain, the part that had won countless cases, told her to ignore Leo's message. He was probably bitter, trying to cause trouble. But the nagging voice of intuition, the one she'd learned to trust in court, whispered that something was off. In the elevator, she checked her calendar. Tomorrow's birthday celebration would bring together their closest friends, including several from the firm. The perfect opportunity to observe, to watch for telling glances or subtle reactions. She'd cross-examine them all, subtly, the way she did with hostile witnesses. The doors opened to reveal Greg in the lobby, pacing. He stopped mid-stride when he saw her, and for a split second, Alice caught something in his expression. Was it guilt? Fear? Before she could analyze it further, his familiar smile slid back into place. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, ever the gentleman. Alice took it, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. 5 years of marriage, countless moments of joy and intimacy, a shared life built on trust and understanding. Could it all be based on a lie? As they stepped into the crisp autumn evening, Alice made a decision. She would forward Leo's email to her personal account, then delete it from her work computer. Tomorrow, during her birthday dinner, she would watch and wait. Someone would slip, someone always did. That's how she'd won her biggest cases, by being patient, observant, and ready to pounce when the moment was right. Greg hailed a cab, and as they settled into the back seat, he squeezed her hand. "I've got a surprise for you tomorrow," he said softly. Alice squeezed back, her smile never wavering. "I'm sure you do," she replied, thinking of her own surprise, the private investigator's card tucked in her wallet, waiting for tomorrow's call. The cab merged into traffic, and Alice watched the city lights blur past her window. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. She just didn't know yet if she was ready for what the truth might reveal. The October sun filtered through the penthouse windows as Alice adjusted a vase of white roses, her reflection fractured across the glossy black granite of the kitchen island. The flowers had arrived that morning with a card from Greg, "To my loving wife on her birthday. Forever yours." The word "forever" seemed to mock her now. She'd barely slept, spending hours analyzing Greg's behavior over the past 5 years. How many business dinners had really been meetings with Jane? How many late nights at the office had been lies? The questions circled her mind like hungry wolves, but her face remained carefully composed. Years of high-stakes litigation had taught her the value of a perfect poker face. Greg emerged from their bedroom, adjusting his charcoal suit jacket. "The caterers are on their way up," he said, crossing the room to embrace her from behind. His cologne, the one she'd given him on their first anniversary, wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. For a moment, she almost leaned into his touch, almost let herself believe in the safety of their shared life. "I need to finish getting ready," she murmured, slipping from his arms. In their bedroom, she opened her jewelry box and removed the sapphire necklace Greg had given her on their wedding day. The stones caught the light, reminding her of another piece of jewelry, the delicate silver bracelet Jane had always worn, a gift from a secret admirer that had appeared on her desk one morning. The first guests arrived at 7, Sarah and Michael from the firm's corporate division, followed by the Hendersons from next door. Alice played the perfect hostess, her lawyer's instincts on high alert as she observed every interaction, every subtle glance. "Happy birthday, darling." Patricia Chen, her mentor at the firm, air-kissed her cheeks. "40 looks fantastic on you." She lowered her voice. "Though I must say, you seem tense. Everything all right?" Before Alice could respond, her phone vibrated. Another email from Leo. "Still ignoring the truth? Check your husband's credit card statements from March 2020. The Plaza Hotel, room 1542. Some birthday surprises aren't worth waiting for." Alice's hand tightened around her phone. The Plaza, where she and Greg had spent their wedding night. The symmetry felt like a calculated cruelty. "Alice?" Patricia touched her arm. "You've gone pale." "Just a difficult case," Alice managed, but Patricia's eyes narrowed. She'd taught Alice everything she knew about reading people, and now those same skills were being turned back on her. The evening progressed like a carefully choreographed dance. Greg played the devoted husband perfectly, keeping her wine glass filled, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. But Alice noticed how he tensed whenever Jane's name came up in casual conversation about old times at the firm. "Remember that charity gala?" Tom from corporate laughed. "When Jane organized the silent auction?" "She always had a talent for organizing things," Greg said, and Alice caught the slight pause, the way his fingers tightened around his whiskey glass. As the party reached its peak, Greg clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast to my beautiful wife," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "5 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. Alice, you've brought light and purpose to my world. Every morning I wake up grateful for your love, your trust." Alice's phone buzzed again. A photo this time, grainy but clear enough, Greg and Jane outside the plaza, his hand on her lower back in a gesture painfully similar to how he was touching Alice now. The timestamp, March 15, 2020, 11:42 p.m. "And I have a surprise for you," Greg continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I've planned a second honeymoon. 2 weeks in Paris, starting tomorrow night. I've already cleared it with the firm." The room erupted in delighted gasps and applause. Alice stood frozen, the phone burning in her hand, Greg's words echoing in her ears. Paris, their dream destination, the city where they'd planned to spend their original honeymoon before that urgent case had derailed their plans. The case that Jane had been helping Greg with. What do you say, sweetheart? Greg's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw what she'd been missing, the fear behind his smile, the desperate plea in his gaze. Alice raised her champagne glass, her hand steady even as her world tilted on its axis. Paris sounds perfect, she said, her voice clear and strong. But first, I think we need to discuss room 1542. The crystal glass slipped from Greg's fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. In the sudden silence, the sound seemed to echo forever, like the breaking of something far more precious than mere glass. The aftermath of Alice's revelation unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Party guests murmured polite excuses and drifted toward the elevator, leaving behind half-empty glasses and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Patricia squeezed Alice's hand before departing, slipping a business card into her palm, not her work contact, but something else. A therapist's name and number, Alice would later discover. In the sudden emptiness of their home, the silence grew thick enough to choke on. Greg stood by the broken champagne glass, his perfectly crafted facade crumbling at the edges. Alice, he began, his voice rough. Let me explain. Explain what, Greg? How you spent our wedding night in room 1542 with Jane. Or should we start with why you're suddenly so eager to whisk me away to Paris? The words felt like shards of glass in her throat, but Alice forced them out anyway. Years of courtroom battles had taught her that sometimes the most devastating blows were delivered in whispers. It's not what you think. Greg's hands trembled as he reached for her. Everything I've done, every decision I've made, was to protect us. Alice stepped back, her heel crunching on a piece of broken crystal. The sharp pain grounded her, reminded her to breathe. Protect us from what? The truth? From my past. From mistakes that would have destroyed everything we built together. Greg sank onto their Italian leather sofa, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. Jane wasn't, she wasn't an affair. She was helping me handle a situation that could have ruined both our lives. The rational part of Alice's mind, the part that had won impossible cases and navigated complex negotiations, told her to listen, to gather all the facts before making judgments. But her heart, raw and bleeding, couldn't bear another carefully constructed lie. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city pulsed with its usual nighttime energy, oblivious to the way her world was unraveling. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Leo. She ignored it. Tell me everything, she said finally, not turning around. Not your sanitized version, not what you think I want to hear. The truth, Greg. All of it. Can we sit? Please. His voice carried a note of desperation she'd never heard before. When she didn't move, he continued anyway. 5 years ago, before our wedding, I received a threat. Someone had discovered information about my first marriage, things I'd buried so deep I thought they'd never surface. Alice's reflection stared back at her from the window, pale and composed. First marriage? To Catherine. In Seattle, 15 years ago. Greg's words came faster now, tumbling over each other like stones in an avalanche. She was unstable. Violent. When I finally left, she threatened to destroy my life if I ever found happiness with someone else. Jane helped me handle the legal aspects of keeping Catherine away, of protecting our future together. And room 1542. The numbers felt like poison on her tongue. A meeting with Catherine's brother. He'd tracked me down, demanded money to keep quiet about what really happened in Seattle. Greg's voice cracked. Jane was there as my legal counsel. Nothing more. Alice finally turned to face him. In the dim light, she could see tears tracking down his cheeks. Why didn't you tell me? Did you think I couldn't handle it? That I wouldn't understand? I thought I was protecting you. Catherine had already destroyed one person I loved. The night at the plaza, her brother showed me photos of you, of your office, your routine. He knew everything about you. Greg buried his face in his hands. I paid him off. Jane helped arrange it, made sure it couldn't be traced. Then she left the firm to make sure there were no connections that could lead back to us. The pieces began falling into place, Greg's occasional nightmares, his overprotective tendencies, the way he'd insisted on their upgraded building security. But something still nagged at her. And Leo? How does he fit into all this? Greg looked up sharply. Leo? Leonardo Martinez? He's the one who sent me the photos, the information about room 1542. Alice watched Greg's expression shift from confusion to horror. Alice, Leo Martinez was Catherine's divorce attorney. Whatever he's told you, whatever game he's playing. Greg stood abruptly. We need to call the police. Now. Before Alice could respond, her phone buzzed one final time. The message contained just 4 words. I'm closer than you think. A soft knock echoed through the penthouse, and both Alice and Greg froze. Through the frosted glass of their front door, a familiar silhouette waited, one that Alice hadn't seen in 5 years, but would never forget. Greg moved with unexpected swiftness, positioning himself between Alice and the door. In the dim hallway light, his face held a vulnerability she'd never seen before, not fear for himself, she realized, but for her. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Alice, Greg's voice was barely a whisper, whatever happens next, please remember that everything I did was to keep you safe. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But Alice was already moving toward the door, her legal training kicking in. If he wanted to hurt us, he wouldn't knock. She reached for the handle, ignoring Greg's protest. The door opened to reveal not Leo, but a woman. She was slight, with silver-threaded dark hair and eyes that held echoes of old pain. Hello, Gregory, she said softly. It's been a long time. Catherine. The name fell from Greg's lips like a prayer, or perhaps a curse. He stepped forward, his body language shifting subtly, not aggressive, Alice noted, but protective, ready to intervene. Catherine raised her hands, showing them empty. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to warn you about Leo. Her voice carried the weight of years, of stories untold. May I come in? Please. Alice found herself nodding, lawyer's instincts warring with human empathy. They settled in the living room, the broken champagne glass still glinting on the floor like a reminder of how quickly certainty could shatter. Leo contacted you, didn't he? Catherine asked, her eyes fixed on Alice. Sent you photos, hints about your husband's past, tried to make you doubt everything? At Alice's nod, she continued, he did the same to me, 15 years ago. Only then, he was working for the man who... She paused, collecting herself. The man who nearly destroyed me. Greg made a sound, part pain, part protest. Catherine, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Catherine's spine straightened. Your wife deserves the truth, Gregory. Not Leo's twisted version, not your protective silence. The real truth. The story emerged slowly, like water from a deep well. Catherine had been young, trapped in an abusive marriage to a powerful man. Greg, then a junior partner at a Seattle firm, had helped her escape, hiding her in safe houses, connecting her with domestic violence advocates, testifying against her ex-husband despite threats to his career. Leo was my ex-husband's attorney, Catherine explained, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He helped bury evidence of the abuse, threatened witnesses, made me look unstable in court. When Greg's testimony finally helped convict James, Leo swore revenge on both of us. The night at the plaza, Greg added quietly, Catherine's brother warned me that Leo had tracked me down, was planning to use my past to destroy my life with you, Alice. He threatened to paint me as the abuser, to twist everything I'd done to help Catherine into something ugly. Alice's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. Jane wasn't just helping with legal documents, was she? Catherine shook her head. She was coordinating with domestic violence advocates, helping set up a new security system for my current location, making sure Leo couldn't find me through Greg's connection to you. But why come forward now? Alice asked, studying Catherine's face. Because Leo's not just seeking revenge anymore. He's desperate. Catherine pulled out her phone, showing them an article dated 2 weeks ago. The Bar Association is investigating him for witness tampering in another domestic violence case. He's trying to destroy Greg's reputation before his own crimes come to light. Greg sank back into his chair, realization dawning. The Paris trip. He knew I'd be out of the country when the investigation goes public. Leaving Alice vulnerable, Catherine finished. Just like James left me vulnerable when he sent Greg out of town on false pretenses 15 years ago. The weight of unrevealed truth hung heavy in the air. Alice looked at her husband, this man who had risked everything to save a stranger, who had carried the burden of silence to protect her, who had trusted her enough to build a life together despite his fears. Her phone buzzed one final time. Leo's message glowed in the darkness. Time's up. Tomorrow, everyone learns who Greg really is. Alice smiled, a fierce expression that made both Greg and Catherine start. No, she said, standing. Tomorrow, everyone learns who you really are, Leo. And this time, you're the one who won't see it coming. In the kitchen, her birthday roses caught the light, their white petals now tinged red by the setting sun, the color of warning, of courage, of dawn breaking after the longest night. In the gentle hours before dawn, Alice sat at her kitchen island, watching Catherine's hands wrap around a mug of chamomile tea. The tremors were subtle, perhaps invisible to someone who hadn't spent years reading witnesses' unspoken truths. But Alice saw them, just as she saw the way Catherine unconsciously positioned herself to keep all exits in view. The hardest part, Catherine said softly, breaking the pre-dawn silence, wasn't the physical pain. It was the way he made me doubt my own mind, my own memories. Greg was the first person who simply believed me. Greg, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep on the couch, stirred at the sound of his name. The lines of worry etched deeper into his face even in sleep, and Alice felt a profound ache in her chest, not for the secrets he'd kept, but for the weight he'd carried alone. Tell me about the day you decided to leave, Alice said, her voice gentle. As a lawyer, she knew the power of testimony, how speaking truth could become an act of reclamation. Catherine's fingers tightened around her mug. It wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 tiny ones. The day I started keeping a diary hidden in my office. The afternoon I memorized the number for the domestic violence hotline. The morning I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize my own eyes. She paused, drawing a steadying breath. But the final push came when I saw Leo laughing with James after a court hearing, sharing jokes while I sat there with 3 broken ribs hidden under my suit jacket. That's when you went to Greg's firm. Catherine nodded. He was assigned to review some corporate documents. But he noticed things others had trained themselves not to see. Asked questions no one else dared to ask. And when I finally told him everything, he didn't just listen, he acted. Alice reached across the island, her hand covering Catherine's. The contact was brief but grounding, a bridge between past and present. We're going to do the same thing now, she said. But this time, you're not alone. And neither is Greg. Her laptop glowed in the darkness as she pulled up her email. I've spent the last few hours reaching out to my contacts. Patricia, my mentor at the firm, she's been building a case against Leo for months. Other survivors, other cases where he helped abusers manipulate the system. We just needed someone willing to connect all the dots. It's dangerous, Greg's voice came from the doorway, rough with sleep and worry. Leo has powerful friends. So do we, Alice replied, opening another email. Remember Jane's family emergency that took her away from the firm? She's been working with a non-profit that supports domestic violence survivors. Building networks, gathering evidence, protecting people like Catherine. All this time, we thought she disappeared to hide your secret, but she was actually helping guard it. Catherine's hands had stopped trembling. You've been in contact with her? Better than that. Alice allowed herself a small smile. She's on her way here. Along with 3 other survivors who are ready to testify about Leo's witness tampering, evidence suppression, and collaboration with abusers. The Bar Association investigation isn't just about one case, it's about a pattern spanning 15 years. Greg moved to stand behind Catherine's chair, a protective presence without being overwhelming. What about his threat to expose my involvement in Catherine's case? Let him try. Alice's voice carried the quiet confidence that had won her most challenging cases. Every document, every action you took, was legally and ethically sound. The only thing hiding it did was give him power over you. Over us. Catherine stood suddenly, her movement startling in its decisiveness. I want to testify too. Not just about James, but about what Leo did afterward. The threats, the manipulation, the way he tried to use Greg's help against both of us. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the kitchen in shades of hope. Alice watched its light catch the tears on Catherine's cheeks, not tears of fear or shame, but of something stronger, something healing. James took so much from me, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. My safety, my trust, years of my life. Leo helped him do it, and then tried to take even more. But he didn't take my voice. Not then, not now. Alice's phone lit up with a text from Patricia. Bar Association emergency hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. Bring everything. Then let's make sure everyone hears it, Alice said, standing. All of our voices, together. Greg moved to embrace her, and this time Alice leaned into his touch, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. The morning light caught her birthday roses, transforming them from blood red back to pure white, the color of truth finally revealed, of darkness giving way to dawn. The Bar Association hearing room held the hushed gravity of a cathedral. Alice sat in the front row, shoulder to shoulder with Greg, their hands intertwined. Behind them, Catherine's presence was a quiet pillar of strength, her silver-threaded hair catching the morning light that filtered through tall windows. Leo's entrance caused a ripple through the room. He moved with the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to bending truth to his will, but Alice caught the flutter of uncertainty in his eyes as they swept across the assembled witnesses. Jane sat among them, her familiar face set with quiet determination, surrounded by other survivors whose presence spoke louder than any testimony. Before we begin, Leo's voice carried its usual smooth authority. I'd like to submit evidence regarding Gregory Montgomery's involvement in. Actually, Alice stood, her voice calm but carrying, we'd like to submit our own evidence first. She moved to the center of the room, feeling the weight of every gaze. What you're about to hear isn't just about legal misconduct. It's about the courage it takes to speak truth to power, and the cost of silence. The next 2 hours unfolded like a tapestry being rewoven. One by one, survivors stepped forward. Their voices sometimes shook, sometimes strengthened, but each story built upon the last, a pattern of manipulation, of justice denied, of Leo's systematic efforts to silence and discredit those seeking safety. Catherine's testimony came last. She spoke not just of her own journey, but of Greg's unwavering support, of Jane's quiet dedication to protecting others, of the network of survivors and advocates who had worked in silence for years to bring this moment to light. The day I left my abuser, Catherine's voice filled the hushed room, I thought I was walking away from everything I knew. What I didn't realize was that I was walking toward everything I could become. She turned to face Leo directly. You tried to use that journey against me, against the man who helped me find my voice. But today, that voice speaks not just for me, but for everyone in this room who refused to let fear have the final word. Leo's facade cracked, just slightly, as the Bar Association panel began their deliberation. Alice watched him reach for his phone, probably to call in favors, pull strings. But the light in his eyes said he already knew, the game was over. The panel's decision was swift and unequivocal. Leo's license was suspended pending a full investigation, with a recommendation for permanent disbarment. But it was what happened after, in the quiet moments as the room emptied, that truly mattered. Jane approached Greg and Alice, tears gleaming in her eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything back then." Protecting survivors meant protecting their stories, their choices about when to speak. "You have nothing to apologize for," Alice replied, embracing her. "You were fighting the battle we didn't even know needed fighting." Outside, the October sun had burned away the morning mist. Catherine stood on the courthouse steps, face tilted toward the warmth. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Alice looked at Greg, saw the peace finally settling into his features. "Now we stop carrying these secrets alone. Now we build something stronger than silence." That evening, in their penthouse, Alice and Greg stood by the window where everything had begun to unravel just days ago. The broken champagne glass had been swept away, but its lesson remained: sometimes things had to break to be rebuilt stronger. "Paris is still waiting," Greg murmured, holding her close. "If you still want to go." Alice smiled, thinking of the network of strength they'd discovered, the bonds forged in truth rather than fear. "I do. But first, I think we have some healing to do right here." On the kitchen counter, her birthday roses had begun to drop their petals, making way for new growth. Catherine had left a small gift before departing, a journal, its first page inscribed with words that brought tears to Alice's eyes. "Our stories are not made whole by forgetting, but by remembering together. By choosing, each day, to replace fear with love, silence with truth, isolation with connection. This is how we rebuild. This is how we heal." Greg wrapped his arms around her from behind, and Alice leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. Outside their window, the city lights began to twinkle on, each one a reminder of the countless stories unfolding in the darkness, of survivors finding their voices, of truth emerging into light. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching night settle over Manhattan. And in that moment, Alice understood that love wasn't about perfect secrets kept, but about imperfect truths shared. About choosing, every day, to face the dawn together, no matter what shadows the night had held.